I have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful speakers here this evening. I want to start with Cate Barron of the Patriot News and PennLive. As Vice President of Content, she led the challenging transition to digital that included converting the daily paper to thrice weekly. And since then, PennLive has become one of the largest news and information websites in the state with more than 7 million monthly unique visitors. Think about that. During her 7-year tenure as editor, the newsroom has continued to be recognized for outstanding journalism, winning Newspaper of the Year, Keystone Sweepstakes Awards, as well as all sorts of national honors. And she and her husband live in Camp Hill, and we're glad to have you back here tonight. Cate,
thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We also have our author star tonight, James Poniewozik, who is the chief television critic for the New York Times. He has written reviews and essays with an emphasis on television as it reflects a changing culture and politics. His dispatches from the 2016 campaign trace the rise of Donald Trump, quote, a being made of pure television, to the nation's highest office, in part through the use of popular media. Along with traditional television reviews, he's examined the broadening definition of TV in an era when anyone with a smartphone can become a compelling broadcaster. And before coming to the Times, Mr. Poniewozik spent 16 years with Time magazine as a columnist and television and media critic, and he received a Bachelor of Arts degree in English. We love our English majors from the University of Michigan. And of course, we're here this evening for his brand new book, displayed right there, Audience of One, Donald Trump, Television, and the Fracturing of America. Critics call it trenchant and often slyly hilarious, a penetrating and sobering review of the raucous, raging, farcical reality show that is the chaotic age of Donald Trump. Yes, the book has received countless praise from numerous media outlets and authors. Publishers Weekly named it one of the top 10 politics and current events books of the fall for 2019. It has been called the smartest, most original, most unexpectedly definitive account of the rise of Trump and Trumpism we've had so far by Book Forum. And Emily Nussbaum writes, the book is the Mueller report of television criticism. James Poniewozik's Audience of One is both damning and illuminating, a witty, penetrating expose of Trump's most intimate relationship, the one with the media that made him. So thank you, James and Cate, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us here at the Scholar. And without further ado, will you please join me in giving them a warm Harrisburg welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we're delighted to be here, and I'm so excited. I read the book in about 2 days. It's fascinating, it's funny, it's challenging, and it is an entirely different take on politics today, so I can highly recommend it. But I'm going to ask you another question first before we get to the book.
Sure thing.
As a lot of you know, I've been editor out at the Patriot News for many, many years, and not too long ago, one of our absolute best writers was a woman by the name of Sharon Johnson. She did our TV and film criticism, and she often said to me she had the best job in the newsroom. I think that's probably still true. Could you talk a little bit about, number one, how you got into the the beat that you're on? And I'm also curious, did you think when you were 10 years old you were going to grow up to be a TV critic?
Oh. I wanted to be an ornithologist when I was 10 years old. And I probably should have, but that ship has sailed. There's no path into TV criticism. I think seriously, almost every TV critic that I know and have as a colleague has sort of fallen backwards into it through one means or another. You don't go to college and major in TV criticism, et cetera, et cetera. But what I had originally started out was I was freelancing in the 90s and wrote for online magazine called Salon, which is still around in a little bit different form. And I became their media critic. I was doing a lot of writing on news media generally, print publishing, and so on. But I always had an interest in pop culture and television especially, so I kind of started gradually sneaking more and more of that into my columns, and got a call out of the blue from Time magazine one day that was looking for a full-time TV critic. and I had not really considered the job, or that as a career path, but I said yeah, and did a lot of catching up and research on the job, but so I sort of fell into it. I would be very impressed with anybody who decided from 10 years old that they were going to be a TV critic and then actually managed to achieve it. So although I did watch just a hell of a lot of TV when I was a little kid, I tell people some of my greatest training for that was that I am the youngest sibling in my family by 9 years, and having older siblings, I just watched a lot of age-inappropriate TV.
Which back then, not too far back, would be Dallas Dynasty, that kind of...
Yeah, and even like, the 70s, Mary Hartman. So, yeah, that was kind of my college education in broadcast television. So, and, it paid off, Mom and Dad.
We're going to get back to TV a little bit later because I'm dying to get some tips from him on what to watch. I got to admit. So, but first, let's get to your book.
Sure.
And I wonder if you could, first of all, my main question is, explain the title. What's it about?
So audience of one is kind of a phrase that has gotten used about Donald Trump, especially since he's become president, in the political press and among pundits, basically referring to the effect that he is an avid, maybe addictive TV viewer, particularly of cable news about himself, and that, basically, Fox and Friends, the television that he watches, has become the forum through which people speak to him. So, the audience of one on that level is Donald Trump. Now, I like to think of it as having a sort of a double meaning, because the book has sort of two storylines, one of which is about the evolution of Donald Trump as a TV figure, but it is also about how television has changed over the recent decades so that we got to the point where the host of The Apprentice could become elected president of the United States. And part of that, just to point to the subtitle, Donald Trump, Television and the Fracturing of America, a big part of that I trace over the course of the book is the history of television moving from a 3-network mass medium to a fragmented niche media enterprise today where you have thousands of cable channels and you have a TV on the phone in your pocket, and there's streaming media, and there's social media, and basically there are smaller and smaller target audiences so that, everybody, this huge American common that used to be, cumulative audiences of tens of millions are now a bunch of little individual audiences of one. So.
Thank you. But there is that theme that Donald Trump is an entertainer and a celebrity and a producer of his own show. I wonder, you've probably watched hundreds of hours of TV with Donald Trump, and I'm really curious to get some views from you on how his persona has evolved since, I think you said he came out in 1980, something or other, on the Today Show. Yeah. As a figure.
Yeah, his first national media appearance was with Tom Brokaw on the Today Show in August 1980, and it sort of brackets the book because I look at a couple of his early TV interviews, one with Tom Brokaw, one that I open up with Rona Barrett, the gossip columnist, who was the first person to ask him if he would want to run for president, presciently. And if you watch these video clips, and you can still, I think, find them on YouTube, it is a sort of, it's like a softer side of Donald Trump. On the one hand, you can see you can see the consistency of the sort of public persona that he's had since then, which is, sort of brash, swaggering, confident, rich guy. But not only does he sort of speak in more diagrammable sentences than he tends to do now. I mean, it's seriously, it's funny, but if you watch, it's actually the truth. But also, it's much more sort of calming, ingratiating, less pugnacious. A sort of more soothing voiced Donald Trump. And that gets back to how I'm talking about the difference in the mass media of the mid-20th century and the fragmented, polarized media of today, that mass media kind of called for a more... anything that you presented on TV had to appeal to a broader amount of people. And this is sort of a more broadly palatable version of Donald Trump that became more extreme and more exaggerated as he, workshopped the media in the character over the 80s and 90s and then through The Apprentice.
One thing I really loved about the book is it was this armchair guide to TV from about 1960 on, and how the shows changed and what people wanted changed. But reality TV is probably the main focus of your book. Can you talk a little bit about how it was born? I loved your take on the Survivor and Richard Hatch and how the Uber hero had changed as well.
Yeah. Reality TV in the broad sense goes back to the early days of TV. You had things like Candid Camera and so on, An American Family on PBS in the 70s. But sort of what we think of as reality TV on in the broad scope today began with Survivor on CBS in the year 2000. And it was sort of a way in this era in which media was starting to fragment and the broadcasters had competitors like HBO, where a network like CBS could put on an entertainment that was, sort of unusual and different and shocking. And one thing that was really striking about the first season of Survivor, in which you can see some parallels to our current politics, is that it was won. I don't know how many people either watched Survivor, watched the first season, but the first season was won by Richard Hatch, who was this sort of conniving, backstabbing, deceitful, but like delightfully entertainingly so competitor, who basically won the final jury vote in which all the people that he had gotten eliminated from Survivor voted on who should win the $1 million prize. He basically won the vote, won the election by brashly acknowledging what a bad guy he was. Yes, I lied, I cheated, I played the game, but that makes me smart. And that was sort of the spirit of reality TV. You saw that carried forward into a lot of other shows, like The Apprentice, which was created by the same creator of Survivor and produced for Donald Trump. And it kind of created this template in popular culture, and one that you could apply to politics for, sort of teaching an audience that they could cheer for an antihero who was, maybe norms breaking, rule breaking, but did it in an appealing and unconventional and, sort of swaggering way.
Well, the other thing about reality TV that you pointed out is how unreal it is. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, there's the common critique of reality TV is there's no real reality in it. It's manipulated, it's edited, and that is all true. And nobody is more aware of that than people who are fans of reality TV. It's part of the pleasure of watching the medium, that people sort of look for, how am I being manipulated by the editing, who's, acting out for the camera, and it creates this zone where the boundary between truth and artifice, reality and fiction are sort of fuzzy. It's real, but it's not real. And again, that is something that is sort of an environment in which Donald Trump, as a public figure, has kind of thrived. He was somebody who engaged in what he called truthful hyperbole back in the 80s in The Art of the Deal. When he would say that Trump Tower was 10 stories taller than it actually was because that sounded better. He was a cameo star in professional wrestling. He's a WWE Hall of Fame member. Another area where people know it's fake, but they sort of immerse themselves in the fakeness of it. And that again proved to be a kind of thing that you could apply to politics, where you can sort of have this winking, take me seriously, take me literally, take me both ways if you you want, and appeal to your followers in a way that they can sort of feel, well, yeah, they see through it, they get it, and yet they're willing to follow your lead anyway.
So the insider in on the joke with a wink.
Yeah, exactly. Which can be sort of a way of feeling savvy, and it can be sort of a way of promoting a kind of cynicism where, you sort of say, well, everybody lies, everybody cheats, so what's the big deal about it? And, just stick with what your team needs to be true and believe that.
Well, I wince when I bring this up, but I have to say that you could say that that's morphed into the whole fake news philosophy of today, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think that very few people, when Donald Trump says something is fake news, believe that means this is absolutely fiction and somebody just totally made it up. I mean, there may be some people who actually believe that, but I think, even ardent followers of his sort of have an understanding was, well, no, it means this thing is true, but it's disrespectful, or it's true, but it's exaggerated, or it's true, but it's just being emphasized to make our side look bad and to, undermine the things that are important to us. And it is this way of playing with reality where you give people a kind of moral permission to disregard it and say, okay, real, fake, what really matters is the game and the competition and what benefits our side.
Having said that, I was really intrigued by your description of Trump's descent down the escalator at Trump Tower when he announced he was running and how the media reacted. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, number one, if we're talking about what The Apprentice did for Donald Trump, you all, at least I'm sure, remember Donald Trump coming down to the brass accented escalator of Trump Tower to the pink marble lined what is actually the food court where I visited often of Trump Tower. I always knew that it was like a great place to find a public bathroom on Fifth Avenue if you needed to and there were great bathrooms.
You just spoiled that for everybody, but that's okay.
Yeah, I know. You didn't think you were going to be getting Midtown Manhattan travel tips here, but that was a shot that was used over and over on The Apprentice. Donald Trump coming down the escalator of Trump Tower, Donald Trump coming down the escalator of the casinos. And the producers would talk about how they would do that because you're shooting somebody from below sort of in a power position. And, visually, just as a director, that kind of, it makes somebody look like a golden god ascending from on high. Everybody's necks are craning up at him. People are looking up at them. That's, it's a visual statement of power and authority that he then borrows for this important campaign launch, where he is surrounded by people holding Trump signs who were hired by an actors bureau for, I believe it was $50. It was this big spectacle that reporters turned out for, but didn't really take seriously. I mean, at the time, there was. This is not me telling tales out of school, but in her campaign memoir. Chasing Hillary, my colleague Amy Chozick, who was a politics writer for the Times, talks about how at the New York Times an editor had told her, "Oh, our political writers aren't going to cover Trump's announcement like the TV writers can do that." There were, it was an example of how from the beginning and through a lot of the campaign, Trump sort of benefited from everybody kind of seeing his campaign as a joke and assuming he was never actually going to win. And that can actually be a tremendous asset in a campaign, as it turns out.
Well, you tell that awful vignette, actually, about how one of the stations would just focus on the empty podium at his rallies, waiting for him to show up.
Yeah, that was the thing you saw over and over again. Not only did cable news air his rallies beginning to end during the 2016 campaign, which is basically providing an hour-plus long free ad for a campaign, but they would be so excited for it that they'd have a split screen just showing the empty podium waiting for him to get on. Because what Donald Trump had this amazing symbiotic relationship with cable news during the 2015-2016 campaign. Because what does cable news need? What does cable news need that, old-fashioned news didn't need? It's 24 hours. If you're putting on news 24 hours a day, you have to convince people that there is something exciting and agitating and thrilling going on 24 hours a day, even if it's the slowest news day of the year. So you create excitement. You have pundit shows, or you overinflate the news that's going on. Well, with Donald Trump, it was fantastic because he was willing to supply them with something new and shocking every second of the campaign. And once he'd established that, it didn't even matter if he wasn't going to make news during one of the rallies, if he wasn't going to say anything new, because just the potential that he was going to come on felt in itself like news, because cable news had come to define news as something that gets the audience excited, not necessarily something that anybody's going to learn from. So, it's famously, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. You'll see breaking news on the screen, right, all the time, even if no news is breaking. With Donald Trump, the news was breaking as long as his lips were moving, and it was just this sweetheart deal between him and cable news that lasted the whole campaign.
I could say, or tweeting.
Or tweeting, yes, absolutely. It didn't even necessarily have to be on camera, and that certainly existed well into his presidency. I'll never forget, CNBC, not long after Trump became president, developed a graphic. I wish I could show you a picture of it that said Trump tweet whenever he tweeted in the morning, so that they could immediately get it up on screen.
I'm curious to hear what your outlook is for this next election cycle coming up. Do you think the media has learned anything from the last time around? You can speak to the New York Times. I know we talk about it a lot at the Patriot News PennLive, but any advanced planning you can let us in on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't sit in on the politics desks meetings at the New York Times, so I don't want to pretend to greater knowledge, than I have. I think everybody in media and in any field sort of tends to, fight the last war. So I think that, at least from the standpoint of television, where, I think I actually, know a little more, I do think that there has been some sense of, revisiting how news media sort of got played the last time around. For instance, those rallies that we were talking about, CNN has stopped airing the rallies uninterrupted, start to finish. There's been obviously a lot of consideration of what do you do when you have this public figure, who is obviously the things that he says and does are important because he's the president of America and, has the nuclear codes and so on. But you can't trust that what he says is necessarily going to be true when he's saying it. So, do you put him on the air live and then correct things that are wrong later? There has been more of that. But on the other hand, you still see the networks going live to say his what do they call them, press gaggles, that he does now in lieu of press briefings at the White House, in front of the helicopter with, the blades whirring and so on. And that's sort of become the new equivalent of the rallies. It's just, it's super exciting and, who knows what he'll say. So, there are always ways to make different versions of the same mistake. And I think that's the problem with me. It's probably the problem with every form of human endeavor, right? Is that, people recognize the last mistake they make, but they don't necessarily recognize when they're making the same mistake in a different form.
Yeah, very true. Thank you. I know we're going to get back on that subject when we have time for the Q&A, and I know you have a lot of great questions out there, but I did have a couple personal asks for you. Number one, top 3 most essential TV shows?
That are on right now, or that are coming up
in recent years.
In recent years, I'm a big fan of Bojack Horseman, which is I don't know if we have any Bojack fans in the audience, which is on an animated comedy about a substance abusing, depressive former actor who is a horse. But it's also hilarious and really deeply moving, and I recommend it to anybody. I like Succession a lot right now on HBO, which I actually think, in a weird way, although it's about business, is one of the best dramas on TV about the Trump era. And over the last few years, I've been a big fan of Transparent, the sort of dramedy on Amazon Prime, which is, I have not seen it yet, but it's going to be airing its finale later in September, and so I'm definitely watching out for that. If anybody hasn't seen The Americans yet, I don't know if that's new news, but if you're talking about the past several years, that's off the air. But if you're looking for something to binge and you haven't watched it yet, it is your patriotic duty to watch The Americans.
Okay, I'm going to keep on this line. I'm fascinated by this. Top 3 most essential TV characters, in your view?
Wow,
past or present?
That's a great question.
It's like a PennLive listicle, I know, but it's okay.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think one's got to be Archie Bunker, because that was somebody that I thought a lot about and wrote about in preparing this book for reasons that may or may not be obvious. What other TV characters do I really, really love? Lisa Simpson is just an all-time favorite, and this is boring and obvious, but I think I have to say Tony Soprano, because that might be but so much of the TV of the last 20 years is like a reaction to him. So,
and what do you hear?
I'm going to think of like 10 characters after this that I should have said.
I know that.
Yeah.
Thanks for playing along. I appreciate that. And any word on what's coming up this fall? We were talking about in the classic days. You used to get the really thick TV guide with a fall schedule, and now it's gotten diffused a bit. But what are you hearing?
There's so much television now. I mean, that is just the big difference in television. It's not just new shows coming, but there's going to be two new streaming networks arriving this fall. Apple TVs and Disney's, which will have a tremendous amount of content. I'm very interested in it, but they have not shown critics any of that. But that's just like, kind of hurtling at the earth like an asteroid. I'm really excited for HBO's series based on The Watchmen, not only because I think that was a really intriguing graphic novel, but it's being adapted by Damon Lindelof, who is the creator of Lost and The Leftovers, a couple of my favorite shows of all time. I could probably, speaking of our top characters, I could probably name 3 like right off Lost off the top of my head. What else? The Transparent finale, again, I'm very excited for. I believe. No, actually, I don't know when that's coming back. Oh, and HBO's doing an adaptation of His Dark Materials, which I think could be very interesting. But again, haven't quite seen it, so I can't vouch for it.
And I'll give you one last question before we go to Q&A, but do you agree that we are in a golden age for television?
Yes, but I mean, I always hate christening golden ages because, people call the 70s a golden age and they call the 90s a golden age. I think there is more great television on now than ever. But that's partly just because, there's more television than ever, and there's more artistic freedom, and it's more inclusive, and you're hearing more different voices. You're getting shows on the air that are both from people who wouldn't have gotten to make TV shows 20 or 30 years ago, and that wouldn't have gotten on the air or lasted 20 or 30 years ago. Atlanta, actually, which is another great example, thinking of shows that I think are like really important right now, is an example of that. So yeah, I would say we're in a golden age now, but every age of TV is kind of a golden age. Like, you just got to know where the gold is,
Yeah. Well, that's what we can count on you for doing. So thank you very, very much.
Sure.
We want to start the questions from the audience.
All right, just raise your hand and I'll come to you. We got one back here.
Have you ever met Trump? And if you haven't, what would you ask him if you did?
I have met Trump. Well, I've actually met Trump several times because he was a TV star for years and years and years while I was a TV critic, especially at Time Magazine. And so I would see him at events for The Apprentice and so on. But I actually did a lengthy interview with him only once in 2003 when The Apprentice was starting up. And that was a whole experience in itself, and I talk about it a little in the book, and I won't rehash it. But, it wasn't a political interview. He was, this guy who used to be Donald Trump, this 80s nostalgia figure who was going to be, hosting a game show. So it was more talking to him as a celebrity. Honestly, if I had the chance to talk to him now, I would not ask him what he thought of the book, but I would actually really be curious about particularly his childhood TV watching habits and what he liked and what. I would ask him about what influence he thought that it had on him, although he sometimes kind of resists self-reflecting in that way, but I would at least ask. But I would just love to know, I know a little about this, and from what I've been able to glean from other interviews, talk about this a little bit in the book, but, I would just love to know what, shows, Donald Trump was sitting down in front of his color TV and watching when he was 8 years old.
You talk a little bit about him sitting there with his mother watching the coronation of Elizabeth in England.
That was a kind of a fascinating thing for me to dig into. The one lengthy childhood memory he shares of his mother in The Art of the Deal. So I should say he or his ghostwriter, or he has told to his ghostwriter, is watching his mother sit down in front of the TV all day in 1953 and watch the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. His mother was a Scottish expatriate. And he said, she was just fascinated by the glamour and the pageantry of it. And it's just this very revealing moment to me, not only about Trump, just as a person, but, and I unpack this some in the world. It reminds you that he's of this first generation, that he was basically born when TV was born, in the 1940s when primetime TV was just getting established. And he's part of this generation that was the first one to grow up with, this entirely different virtual space, the same way that, kids today are the first ones growing up entirely with social media. And I thought it's kind of a revelatory thing to understand just, how a worldview starts getting created.
We have a question back here.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm a cultural weirdo. I don't watch TV, except the evening news at 6:30. When I'm old and decrepit, I'll stay home and watch TV.
That's fine. I won't hold it against you.
This is curious. I've noticed over the years that my attention span to stick with things is so much shorter. And where I used to read a long newspaper article or watch a TV program. So it's not just that the news media is fragmented. I think our attention span in general has gotten a lot shorter. Can you comment on that? Because
I mean,
and how we get not only from fragmented sources, but we only take in fragmented portions of the news.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it's like this thing, right? Like there's so many. Number one, there are so many distractions in the modern world, so many different screens, and it rewires your brain into how to distribute its attention and its focus. But I also think, you say you don't watch much television, but yeah. But this is a thing I also get into in the book, whether you watch TV or not, television is the nervous system of our culture. Mm-hmm. It's where politics are conducted. It's how the news plays out. The news is affected often more and more these days by television. And whether or not you watch TV yourself, I say it's like secondhand smoke. You are living in a society whose metabolism and whose mindset is largely set by electronic media. And I don't mean to be like one of these TV's just the world's going to hell because of TV, because I'm a TV critic, and I'm not a masochist. I love television, but it has these actual effects on everyone, whether you're watching or not, that people should be conscious of.
We have a question over here in the corner, back over this way.
Oh, yeah.
Hello. Thank you for this book, and I really appreciated the tone, which is you cover some very serious things, but you do it in a fairly light,
Yeah.
entertaining way with humor. And thank you. And but my question is, I know you cover the Democratic debates.
Yeah.
And I don't think you've written about the most recent one yet.
I have not, because I should worry. I didn't watch most of it. I was actually doing another event like this while it was going on, so I was competing with it.
I was going to ask you if you had a comment on, as a television moment, you know, not a policy moment, but Beto O'Rourke's comment about we're going to take your, what did he say? We're going to get.
Oh yeah. The hell yes, we're going to take your AK-47. Yeah, that I actually saw. Okay, this is like another aspect of TV, right? It's like so much of the TV we quote unquote watch now. We're like watching through, seeing the clips today, right? So I kind of saw that Democratic debate the same way that I like quote unquote watch Saturday Night Live. Is that I'll hear what the good skits are and I'll watch it on YouTube or whatever. So I saw some of those moments. Beto's, I think I did not really see how it went over in the room, but it seemed like a really strong moment of emotional connection. I mean, without getting into, anybody's position on gun control or whether you think it's good or bad or what, God knows nobody should be like asking me my opinion on, how to stop gun violence. But it was, a moment where it was like this second of, I'm just going to say it. And I think that creates a great emotional connection, at least in a Democratic primary. I'm not predicting that he's necessarily going to do any better because of it, because he's on his, fourth or fifth campaign reboot at this point. But I wouldn't be surprised with something like that if his polls go up one or 2 points, because it's these moments of sort of authenticity or like rolling the dice that people often look for in these debates. So.
You
Those
also
are my
mentioned
big
that
thoughts.
debates have turned into to boxing matches now, and they didn't used to be like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not it's not the Lincoln Douglas debates anymore. I mean, for one thing, they're I'm sure not in the classic sense debates at all. It's it's campaign candidates standing on a stage and saying things, giving sound bites in quick succession, and only occasionally is there an exchange from them. But they're also just performances. I sometimes see when people criticize the punditry about debates after the fact, they'll say, oh, that's just theater criticism. Like you're just looking at the surface of it. And I can understand it, because sometimes for pundits, like analyzing the TV element of it can be a way of dodging the serious politics. But I also think the theater criticism aspect of it is important, because these are performances. People are not just trying to send literal messages to the voters. They're trying to send, sort of emotional messages. They're trying to demonstrate through how they make their argument what they would be like as a general election candidate, what they would be like as a president. And so, that theater stuff, whether you want it to matter or not, totally does matter. And again, just to, keep up the sales pitch for this product. I talk about that a lot in how Donald Trump approached the 2015 Republican primary debates, which he treated basically as like an elimination reality contest and sort of a dominance contest, where you just picked fights because the point of fighting is to fight and to show that you're a fighter. So, I'm all for theater criticism of debates like that, because that's how people are watching them and that's how they're being affected.
Okay, I have a question right over here.
You had a column in Times, I think it was this past Sunday. You mentioned a little bit about Reagan. You kind of compared a little bit Reagan and Trump. Would you go a little bit more into that? Reagan was an actor, but he seemed to have some real convictions, and I'm not sure about Trump. Would you go just go into it a little bit more about the difference?
Yeah, I'll try and give you the thumbnail of it. I mean, what I was sort of responding to, I wrote this lengthy essay called "Donald Trump as a Television Character," something like that. I can't remember the headline. In the Sunday Review section of the Times last weekend. It was sort of a curtain raiser for this book. And I went into, a lot of people have made the comparison, sort of trying to make sense of just things today between Donald Trump and, Trump's really, he's like Reagan. He's an entertainer who entered the White House. And we can make sense of it in these terms that we understand. And it's on one level an okay comparison. They were both people who came out of the world of entertainment. Donald Trump came much more directly out of the world of entertainment. He went straight from Celebrity Apprentice to the White House, whereas Donald Trump was governor of California for 2 terms. But also, I think that the more salient, important difference is that Ronald Reagan was an actor, and Donald Trump was a reality TV performer. And playing a character in the 2 media is very different. As an actor, you have to imagine yourself in the shoes of other people. So you have to have empathy, what we call in regular life empathy, to imagine that other people have inner lives and that they're just as important as yours, and you have to believe this so deeply that you can even make a fake character on a page become real. And Reagan often said that he thought that helped prepare him to be president. As a reality TV character, you're playing yourself, but you're playing yourself more. You're exaggerating the provocative and outrageous aspects of yourself. You're weaponizing the parts of your personality that you can use to get attention and take attention away from other people. And it very much is a kind of performance that it's like anti-empathy. You kind of have to not believe that other people are too real, because that'll take the focus away from you, and it'll prevent you from being your fullest you. So that was the big difference I wanted to spell out for people.
Okay, to your left, we have a question just past the podium here.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the symbiotic relationship between CNN and Trump. The camera focused on the empty lectern.
Yeah.
The political premise, I'm a political consultant, that if you can have your candidate's name out there, sometimes whether it's good or bad, that's an advantage, because in that case, in that primary, there were 16 candidates, however good or bad they were, but you didn't get the attention that Trump got.
Yeah.
Okay. That extends beyond television.
Yep.
And if we think about the gentleman's comment back here about attention span, and we think about your comment about CNN wonders, how can we keep the audience excited today? They're not saying, what is the real news we have to report? You also get into this attention span issue. I don't mean to go on so long here, but now
we have the attention span for it. It's
now
okay.
News coverage. Thanks. Now news coverage is 5 things you need to know before you watch the debate.
Yeah.
And it extends further. Tonight's interview was name 3 television characters, name 3 television shows. Give it to us in little bites like that. How do we arrest this trend? Because I'm saying it's not just television, it's the print media, it's interviews, it's everything. How do we address this?
Yeah, I don't know that we can. I mean, number one, I don't think that's inherently bad. It depends how you apply it. I mean, I actually thought we got a productive conversation out of me giving my top 3.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in. I feel like I can do that. I would say this. I'm with you to a point. I think that these little lists and fun things and what they call speed dating of interview, where you just fire off at people to get reactions, that's interesting too. But we also want to we ran a very long profile actually on James in the paper on Thursday. We want to make sure that we have the lengthy pieces as well, but you want the variety out there. Sometimes we go overboard, no doubt about it, but sometimes making somebody react to something really quickly can yield to some pretty interesting answers.
But I guess my shorter answer is that I don't think that you can just, if there is, this sort of global, change in the way the society communicates that's being, affected by certain media, people will say, well, how do we just make it stop? Yeah, I mean, you can't. What you can do is recognize the media environment that you work in and use it better. You can do smart listicles and dumb listicles, and you can also use. I would say as much as the flittering attention span is a problem in our society, and I see it in myself. One thing that you see, there's sort of a corollary to that in digital media, is that it also enables very in-depth focus. In other words, the same digital media that gives you your Twitter feed that is 280 characters at a time and shifts from topic to topic to topic to topic, and has has me unable to sit down without looking at my phone every 90 seconds for some new stimulus. Also, people use it to listen to 2-hour podcasts.
Yeah.
People will explore long form journalism online. That still exists. But I think you have to meet people where they are and try to do it better.
Okay.
I'm glad, if I may just add, that I can go to the Digital Times every morning.
Yeah, I'm glad you can. Yeah.
We have a question up to your right, up here on the second level, over here to your right. Over here. Hi.
Oh, hey.
Over here.
I'm surrounded on all sides here.
I wanted to follow up on the Reagan analogy in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
These are Trump and Reagan, if I'm not mistaken, are our two oldest presidents, and we now know that...
So far, yeah.
So far,
Sorry.
Touche. We now know that in Reagan's last years as president, he suffered from dementia. He was very much not with it, and his staff had to basically shield him from reality, if you will. Having watched Donald Trump over the years, you said that early on it was a kind of kinder, gentler Donald Trump, and now more combative. Do you see in the most recent years, even most recent months, evidence of complete flight from reality or partial flight from reality, that we're getting to the point where we may, 20 years from now, it will be revealed that Donald Trump was mentally, like Ronald Reagan in his last years as president?
I get asked that a lot. I mean, the only answer I can first answer you in the Trumpian way and say that many people are saying that, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not even Dr. Harold Bornstein. And while I can glean a lot of information from watching TV, I can't diagnose somebody from it. The only thing that I will say is that whatever is or isn't going on with Donald Trump's internal wiring, like all of ours, eventually, I do think that regardless, at least part of the change that you see from very early Donald Trump to the Donald Trump of today, which is not just rambling, but sort of speaking in sort of much punchier and combative sentences, and just the more belligerentness of the tone. It's also partly that's going to be the effect when all of your inputs for the past 20, 30, however many years have rewarded you for being that way. He was on TV for 14 seasons being a TV star because he told people you're fired every week. That's going to tell you that that kind of combative tone is something you're going to get rewarded for. So I think at least some of those stylistic changes can be attributed to that. The rest of them I leave to future biographers and/or doctors.
Okay, we have enough time for 3 more questions, which I've selected here. We're going to be coming up here to the front.
I found your book very compelling and very appalling.
Thank you. We're going to put that on the cover of the paperback.
And I never watched those shows, so it was somewhat horrifying to me to read all the history that went into him and the celebrity and the politics together.
Yeah.
And I am wondering do people who are Trump fans, have they read the book at all, and does it change their mind?
I will be, well, number one, if 3 years of hasn't like changed anybody's mind in supporting Trump. I love my book, but I don't think that's necessarily going to do it for anybody. I would, however, I will be honest. I've heard, I've gotten feedback on my book from Republicans that it's tended to be like more Republicans who are either never Trumpers or Trump agnostic. I talked to Charlie Sykes about it the other day. We had like a great conversation. I've not gotten a lot of feedback on it yet from Trump voters. I would imagine, it's not the sort of book they're going to seek out. I'd love to know if somebody like hated it, I would love to know why they did. But yeah, I have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, we have one more up here.
You mentioned Archie Bunker as your favorite, or one of your favorite TV characters, and that also there's some connection to Archie Bunker in the book. I've thought that Archie's almost like a quintessential Trump supporter. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk more about what your thoughts are on that?
I mean, Archie Bunker's appeal, Archie Bunker, protagonist of All in the Family, created by Norman Lear, the great and still great television creator, still kicking and working in TV, was this, outspoken, outrageous, loudmouth, bigot, racist, who said incredibly offensive things on a brilliant and hilariously written and deeply humane show that people loved to watch. And Norman Lear's intention in creating the show was that in order to sort of understand bigotry and racism, you had to be able to, you couldn't just demonize the people who thought that way or thought of them as not understandable. You had to see it in somebody that that you loved, so that you could see this in people in your own life. And to him, that was a way of that was the best way to social understanding and progress. However, you could read Archie two ways, and people received Archie two ways. You could laugh at what he said, or you could laugh with what he said. And there were people, who watched All in the Family and thought that it was a great show because it satirized him so well and satirized that sort of point of view of ignorance. And there were people who loved it because they agree with the stuff that he said, and they loved this, that there was somebody on TV saying it, and they thought there was nothing wrong with Archie. Now, you can say, well, then why is he one of my, favorite characters on television if some people saw an excuse for their own racism in him? But my answer is that that's what art is. Art is complicated, and you can't control people's responses to it. If there's just a simple answer, this person is absolutely bad, and that's like a fairy tale or something. In order for art to be powerful, you have to be able to operate on it with your own mind and interpret it your own way. And there is always the possibility that some people will interpret it in really noxious ways. But anyway, the connection to Donald Trump, I will just say that that was another case where a big part of his appeal, and this is not me saying this is what his followers would say at his rallies and do over and over. He says what he means. He says what he's on his mind. You might not like it, but he calls it like he sees it. No less than Steve Bannon, who was one of the architects of Trumpism, referred to him as, it was a quote in the New York Times actually, as, "He's Archie Bunker, dude," and he meant it as a compliment.
Okay, we have one final question right over here.
I was curious about what you think about the future of TV news if Donald Trump loses and we have a president who is normal and his truthfulness is not questioned all the time. It seems like that's so much fodder for CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News. What you think of those? What you think their future is if there's a different president?
Donald Trump always says himself that, you know, if you didn't have Donald Trump, if you had a boring president, their ratings would crater. And, you know, that's one thing that I think, you know, Donald Trump is totally right on, or at least largely right. I mean, in the sense that, you know, it's undeniable that pro-Trump television, anti-Trump television, or just Trump skeptical television has seen its ratings shoot up because we're in an environment where like people are just on edge, you know, all the time. That means news viewership. However, you know, I think we've also seen that, you know, the business model of cable news is to find agitation and, if necessarily, create it, you know, even where it doesn't exist. So, you know, when Obama was president, you know, there was the Tea Party. You know, there's if the president is more dull, there's also the reaction to that president. There's the culture war, which, you know, largely brought Trump into office and will continue nonetheless. So I would not be surprised if you know, the ratings slump off, but I also think, you know, there's just going to be substitutes, even, you know, if you know, we end up with, you know, President Michael Bennett or something, and you go weeks without hearing about him.
All right, let's give a round of applause to Cate and James for a wonderful talk today.